Hello, everyone. Welcome to Modern Handgunners. I'm Bob Main from the Handgun World podcast, and with me is
Ben Branham from the Modern Self-Protection podcast, and we're glad to have you here.
We appreciate you watching. This is kind of a joint venture. I do a weekly show, or sometimes every 2 weeks, called the Handgun World podcast at Apple Podcasts. You can find it, iTunes, whatever it's called, and at handgunworld.com. And what's your podcast, Ben?
Mine's really hard. It's the Modern Self-Protection podcast, and you can find that at modernselfprotection.com, and it's available on all of those podcast catchers that you probably got this show from. If you got this show from it, it's probably there too. So go check it out.
Yeah, so we're here in our home studios during the COVID-19 quarantine. So we're going to talk about striker-fired guns versus hammer-fired handguns. Kind of an argument that could probably go on for weeks if you had it with somebody, right?
Yep. So we got old school 1911s versus the new school Glocks like Bob's got over there.
Versus the new school Glocks like the Glock 43X. So let's get started about these. I'll start. I'll throw in a few things about striker-fired handguns, my opinion on those, and then I'll turn it over to you, and you talk about double action, single action, or single action only hammer-fired guns. And one reason I think that striker-fired is kind of like all the rage today is because, first of all, most of the striker-fired guns have a polymer frame. Most, not all. So they're lower cost to purchase. They're lower cost for the manufacturers to make. The polymer frames have become so good and so high tech that, you know, pretty much the accuracy is comparable, and in some cases just the same, just to show and prove to everybody that this gun is unloaded, empty magazine, and I got a empty magazine well, and it's a clear gun. Here's a big plus, I think, to striker-fired guns, especially for a new gun owner. This right here, the trigger press. It's a smooth trigger press, and it's the same trigger press every time. Now, I know you're going to say that the 1911 has the same trigger press every time, and you'll explain that, but there's a little bit of a disadvantage to that. But striker-fired guns just seem to be easy to shoot. What do you think, Ben?
They are, and that's one of the reasons everything's gone to them everywhere. But there's some advantages and some disadvantages to everything, right?
Yes.
So I guess we'll start with the advantages of the cool striker-fired guns. And I'm playing with a bunch of guns here. I got an old Ruger P89. This is the first handgun I ever bought, and it's a brick, but it handles like a brick. It shoots like a brick. The trigger's like a brick. But you know what? It still runs, and even though it's broken, which I might pull it apart and show you where it's broken, it still runs, so something is said about Ruger there. And then I've got, in pieces over here, I've got my striker-fired gun. This is my backup carry gun, my Smith & Wesson M&P. So really, I mean, starting with the advantages, it's that same trigger every time, all the time. That press is the same no matter what, right? And that's one of the easy things about it. It just seems to work. When we start to talk about all the other things, we can talk about manufacturing these out of the polymer is so much cheaper than manufacturing the hammer-fired guns. And one of the best thing I think about that is the number of pieces. So when I look at the frame, inside the frame of one of these, no hammer spring, no extra spur, no extra capture mechanism for the hammer, and there's no linkage. There's only one trigger link that goes to this little nub right here on most of your guns, and that's the only thing that makes the gun fire, especially when a Glock has a little nub up there, and that's what makes your Glock fire. There doesn't have to be more pieces inside the gun, just a couple pieces part of the trigger, and that is it. The Smith & Wesson actually has a couple more pieces than the Glock does, but the same thing. When you start pulling apart some of these, let's take this older Ruger here, see if I can get it apart real quick. It's been a couple years. It's been a while since I've done
that thing's
this.
So heavy, I think when you go to the gym, you use that to do bench presses, don't you?
I think I can. and I forgot a piece.
It's your weightlifting gun.
Ruger has a cool piece, actually. And I like this design, so I'm gonna rail on some guns right now. One of the
Rail on some
biggest
guns, right?
problems with the striker guns, I'm gonna go down the negative here because I'm looking at the Ruger, is that you have to pull that trigger to release the tension on the striker to get it to
Some.
most guns, right?
Some. Yeah.
So on the Smith, you don't have to, but that's how you can do it. Smith has a little lever in here that's really small that you need a tool to get to when if you're not, if you don't have the gun taken apart, you have to get in there with a pen or something and do a tool. Glocks, you have to discharge the gun. You have to release the spring, right? Tension to get it apart.
Yeah, what he's talking about for people who are new to guns is he's talking about this in order to field strip a Glock. First of all, I got to pull down on the takedown lever, and I have to do this. I have to press that trigger to be able to take the gun apart. Glocks never changed that. They've taken some criticism for that. Maybe the criticism is justified. I don't know. Here's what I do know. I've never had a Glock accidentally discharge on me when I was field stripping it, because there's only one way that any pistol can discharge when you're field stripping it is you didn't do this. You didn't clear the gun and then double check and visually check. You didn't clear the gun. So when you went like this, it fired. That's the only reason why that happens, folks.
And unfortunately, it's happened more than we want to know. So the Ruger, coming back to this design, some law enforcement departments wouldn't take it because of one of the safety features. To actually field strip this thing, you have to lock the slide to the rear. And inside, you actually have to push a knob down, which is actually the ejector is one big long thing. And that actually slides down and covers the mag well. So there's no way I could have a live round in here when I'm trying to get
that's
it
a good thing.
out. But I have to have the magazine out, and law enforcement thought that this was going to be a problem in the field, that pieces would break, and I know some law enforcement wouldn't do it. But I liked it because I have to push the little dealie down. That means there can't be a magazine in there, and I have to lock the slide back, which means if the gun's functioning, there can't be a round in there because the round's going to eject too. And then I don't have to pull the trigger. I just let the slide go home, and then I have to link it up and push the little dealie out here. The slide stop comes right out, and then you can get it off if you didn't screw it up like I did. I keep messing this up. I did this 5 times off of camera before we started, and now I can't do it.
It always fails on camera. While you're working on that, folks, any gun, any handgun, whether it's hammer fired, striker fired, whatever it is, you leave a round in the chamber and you're asking for trouble. Even if it's got safety mechanisms, don't trust those. Don't trust the safety mechanisms on a gun. Just don't leave a round in the chamber, okay? It's that simple.
So when I get this thing apart and we start looking inside on all these pieces, we've got a ton of crap up here, little tiny pieces that can all break that are part of this hammer and disconnect and all the sorts of stuff. And then the spring is actually located back here in the grip swell, just like everything else. And then there's a knob piece that holds it all together. So that is literally a puzzle under spring tension on there. You see you got 2 drift pins that hold it all together and all this other parts in here. So your striker fired gun, the amount of parts would end right here with this one is the trigger guard, or the trigger bar.
Yeah.
And then everything else in here, this is all extraneous crap when it comes to a striker fired gun. You don't need all this stuff and all these springs and all this other little tiny parts that can break. And if I look in here, I see 2 little tiny levers. I see a little tiny spring on a little tiny bar. I'm trying to see what else is in there without doing it. Oh, there's the disconnect and all sorts of cool stuff. So there's like 5 little levers in here held together with 2 pins and a spring that all are just breakage parts on a gun like this that you don't have in your other guns. Plus, taking these things apart is a pain in the butt. Taking the striker fired guns apart is generally easier.
Usually a lot easier. Yeah.
You get another cool thing about the grip is this grip is pretty big because back here is the mainspring. You have a long spring that coils all the way down here and holds it all together. So it's not just the magazine. You have to have enough room for that magazine and the spring back there so you can see how much bigger this gun has to be in the grip versus all of your other guns that this part of the gun is just shaped so that you can feel better in your hand. There's nothing in there that has to be there so that you don't have to have that big space. And I show you my gun just fell apart when I turned it upside down. the trigger, whole trigger piece right here, no longer stays in the gun like it's supposed to. It was supposed to have a rocker arm and kind of stay in there, but it hasn't in years and years. But when I put it together, it gets held together by the parts, and I don't have a problem. But yeah, so kudos on Ruger for making a gun that I broke God knows how many years ago that still runs. And I would send it back to him to fix it, but I'm afraid I wouldn't get the same one back. And this one has a lot of sentimental value to me because, honestly, my dad bought it for me when I was like 16. So
Right.
I've had
Right.
it for a long time, and I'm not going to give it up. And it just becomes, yeah, it's a brick. I take it out and shoot it every once in a while. But they're fun, and you can see that this one's a traditional double single action trigger, which is kind of
Yeah.
cool, like the Beretta, the Smith & Wesson. A lot of other guns in the ilk used to be that kind of thing. Haha, now my trigger's falling out again, and I can't put it back together. I'm
So
telling
talk about your 1911 for a little while.
you. The better one?
Well, some say it's a better one.
Well, yeah, I
It
love
depends.
1911s, and if I had all the money in the world, I would be running stuff. And honestly, if this company, Para Ordnance, was still in existence, I would just be buying these guns, and I would have never bought anything else. But I got one of these. This is one of the first guns I ever bought when I was 21, and I carried it as an armored car guard for like 7 years. It is a tremendous pistol. But 1911s, the big thing is it's a single action only gun, which means the hammer has to be cocked. Gives it a super light, crisp trigger that hardly moves at all. You can almost see it on camera if I push the gun. If I push the safeties down, you can see it. It barely moves at all to fire the gun. With the 1911 comes extra safeties. Grip safety has to be depressed, and a manual thumb safety. If you shoot one of these, your correct position for your thumb is always right here on top of the safety. There is nowhere else for this thumb to go. You're shooting the hand thumb, rest on top of that safety. The only time it comes off is when you're done shooting, you flip that thing back on safe. And even then, my thumb rests right there. If you always grip the gun like that, you'll never have a problem. It's when you try to do other crap that you have problems with these things. But they have lots of idiosyncrasies, and this thing has 30 moving parts probably in the grip frame
Ooh,
alone.
wow.
You know, the Glock has like 30 moving parts in the whole thing. This one has as many parts in the frame. So there's a lot of little parts, and they all have to be hand-fitted too. This safety wasn't the original safety. I had this hand-fitted, and actually when I was younger, I thought I was going to be a gunsmith. Bought a safety, tried to hand-fit it, broke the safety, had to go in there and say, hey, can you put this in here? So I found me a good gunsmith to do all my work for me. So all my Glocks and my M&Ps, I do all my own armor work. I don't have any problem. The striker-fired guns are just plug and play. You just drop parts into them. These 1911s have to be hand-fit and stoned and everything, and I am just not that good. So anything I need done. But you can see on this one, too, you got this big backstrap here, and that's actually where the mainspring is. So you see the mag well, and then this extra part right here. Well, that's just to run the gun and make the hammer fire. So it makes the gun much bigger. And this one, I don't have a magazine here. This one's giant. It's a P14, so it holds 14 rounds of 45.
45.
So it's
yeah.
huge. But it's really nice. It makes you get this nice, perfect, crisp trigger press, and then there's almost no take up, and there's no, people are going to hate me, but it's actually a shorter reset and a smaller trigger move than a Glock by far.
So, yeah. So Ben, what are the advantages of hammered fired guns? I mean, most of them, when they're in single action mode, they have better triggers. But what are some of the advantages that you feel?
So there's two advantages on the different guns. First, the single action gun like this, you got the advantage of the nicer trigger all the time, the single action. I've got my manual safety that's in the way, and I've got my extra safety that I can always, there you go. I used to say, and I still say, that a 1911 is the safest gun I can holster. There is no way I can make this gun fire if I holster this gun correctly. When I go to holster the gun, I put the manual safety on. I break my grip so that the grip safety is engaged. And then I put my thumb over the hammer right there so that there is no way if I take this thing and I jam it into a holster or I jam it anywhere, there's no way. It doesn't matter. Trigger can pull all day. I can have that kind of accident, but it's not going to fire. There's 3 things stopping the gun from fire. Actually 4 if you count it on this one. But I've got the grip safety, the manual safety, and then my thumb is stopping the gun from firing. So if I did catch something on the trigger and it goes in, even if I had the safety off and it goes in, it's not going to work. And then even if I hold down the grip safety and then accidentally push it, I still got it under my thumb and it's not going anywhere. All I got to do is recock the gun, put the safety back on, and I'll be fine.
And
So,
that is one of the good advantages of any hammer fired gun is you can put your thumb on the hammer like that when you're reholstering, and that's another level of safety.
and that's how I teach people how to holster guns: is put your thumb back behind it. If you use more than one gun, it's not going to help you on your Glock too much, but you'll feel when there's pressure on your Glock if you're putting it in there and the slide gets caught and starts pushing back a little bit on anything. You put your hammer here and the slide starts pushing back. You feel it on your thumb, but it doesn't really help you. But all the other hammer fired guns, even my other one, if I put my hand over the hammer, doesn't matter, because if it starts to cock or fire, my thumb is there. One, I can
Yeah.
stop it from moving, because if I push my thumb up here, there's way more leverage on from this point than this point. So I can't even. I'm not using a lot of pressure on my thumb, but I can't move the stupid trigger at all. So it's
Yeah.
not going anywhere. That's a
Now,
cool advantage.
back to striker fired guns for a minute. I won't carry anything but a striker fired gun. I don't have all the cool safety features that you have in the striker fired gun, but what I have here is I have simplicity. I can draw this gun from the holster and I can shoot. All I got to do is draw, making sure I keep my finger off the trigger when I draw, and then all I have to do is point and shoot. And I get the same consistent trigger pull every time. The same trigger. So, some people like what we call double action, single action guns, which have a hammer, but the first pull is a long double action pull, and the second pull and every trigger pull after that is a single action. I have just never been able to. It's just me. I've never been able to master that. If you can, nothing wrong with those. I like the simplicity and reliability of the striker fired guns.
Yeah, and I kind of think that's some of the advantage to the double action guns I miss. I used to carry a SIG 226. Really
Hmm.
loved that one through the police academy with it, and I outshot everybody in the police academy with it. They wouldn't
Hmm.
let me carry my 1911, so I said, I'll show you, and I outshot everybody with a borrowed 226. But I do miss the 226, and then I can be ultra aggressive coming out of the holster on it, because there's a
Yeah,
lot of trigger pull there, and coming out of the holster, as soon as that thing was level on target, I would get halfway through the trigger press, and then once I got out there, it was a little bit more, and then just fine refinements of the sights. It made me a little better shooter because it made me slow down a little bit once I got out there to make a great shot. And then
and SIG 226s are fine handguns. That was the first handgun I ever owned.
and I should have kept that one that I borrowed for the
Me too.
academy. I tried to I tried to buy it from him, and he said no. And then I tried to say, well, what if I lost it and just paid you for it? And he said, I'd fine you, and I will get my gun back. And he was one of the best investigators in California at the time. So I was like, yeah, he probably will find me. So, I gave him his gun back. But he was real nice to loan it to me. But they were old 226s that had thousands and thousands of rounds through them. He used as loaner guns, and they were originally made in Germany and stuff. Germany or wherever the original plant was, and it was just a tremendous gun. Amazing. No MIM parts or nothing. It was just an amazing gun to shoot.
Yeah.
So, but I did like that, and I don't mind the double single action. It makes me a better shooter on that first shot, and then after you get it back, it's still that crisp light trigger pull that everything else has. This one is super long, but the SIGs and some of the other ones are nicer. Some of the CZs are amazing, but
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
CZs have some real good ones these days.
so that's some of the advantages of the double action gun over the single action and over the striker fire. The last thing I want to say about the double action and hammer fired guns is there's a big, and Bob, you love this one. This is your favorite. There's a big disadvantage to every hammer fired gun. When you look back here, there has to be all this space between the frame and the slide and the
Yep.
hammer, because that's where all that mechanism is, right? When you come into
Yep.
these other guns like my Smith, you can look into here and see how thin it is here. Yeah, Bob's got his holding up, and then how much thinner if I even hold the slides up and you look at side by side, the slide height of my Ruger is noticeably lots thicker than the
Yep.
slide height when I look at the back. I don't know if I can show
And
it on
especially
camera.
much higher than something like a Glock, too.
Yeah. And then the Glock has some amazing. They call it bore height or height over bore, and
Bore
really
axis.
bore axis. There's a lot of things, but it's really how high that muzzle sits and
Yeah.
the
See,
barrel
it
itself
sits.
sits over the
The
back of your
guns sit
hand.
low in your hand. Most striker fired guns, most will sit lower in your hand. There's some striker fired guns out there that sit up high, but most of them are low.
This one's not too bad on my 1911 because I had it cut in the beaver tail and everything. But when you go
Yeah.
to some of these like the Sig, and the Sig is almost the same as this one. I mean, my
Yeah.
it's way higher in my hand. I can feel it being top heavy. And what that does is under recoil, it gives it leverage. The gun has more
Yeah.
leverage on you to
A
push up,
traditional
not just
SIG,
back. If I put my
a
hand
traditional
straight
SIG
here,
is probably higher than that. The double action, single action SIGs probably even higher than that one.
so they talk about that high bore axis or low bore axis that Glock always talks about, and that's what they're talking about. You get your hand way up. The further you get your hand up behind that barrel and get it in line, the less the gun is going to want to lever up on you. And the less the flatter it'll shoot, people will say and stuff. So those are some of those terms, but really it's just leverage on the gun,
Yeah.
And if you look at the gun, it's L-shaped, it's a lever. If I push here, it's a lot more force than if I push down here, kind of the same thing. And the gun does the same thing, but if you hold it up higher, you get less of that leverage feel and more of that straight back feel instead of pushing up.
Yeah.
So that's a
So we're
big
getting
advantage
close
of
to
these.
we're getting close to running out of time. Sorry to cut you off there, Ben. So, but what I want to say, just closing, about 20 seconds here. What are your thoughts? Those of you who are watching this video, what do you prefer? Striker fired, hammer fired, and why? Tell us. We gave you our preferences, um, and let us know. In closing, if you like this video, if you like what you saw, remember that Ben and I do a membership site. Ben, tell us about that.
We do the Shooters Club members site at shootersclubmembers.com. It's $75 a year or $8 a month. Me and Bob have like 85 videos up there and a bunch of
Yep.
extra podcast reviews. And there's everything from learning how to draw the pistol and the differences between running some of these guns to team tactics. Bob and I broke down and how to
Yeah.
enter and clear rooms for a while. So we had a lot of fun shooting all those videos. We got a lot of stuff up there for you to learn. Right now, if you're COVID stuck like us, that's why we're not on the range shooting this video. We're at our house, unfortunately, or we'd actually be out shooting the guns because that's what we like to do. It's a great place for you to go and just start learning a bunch of stuff. There's a bunch of dry fire techniques in there. There's a bunch of stuff you could do dry, and it would be super easy payment. And I'm telling you, $75. I wish I had this kind of knowledge back when I first
For
started.
$8 a month.
Yeah, that's yeah, I had to go to $300 and $400 classes to start getting all this knowledge back in the day. So now you can get it online for super cheap. So
For
go
eight
check that
bucks a
out.
month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
shootersclubmembers.com.
Yeah, and we're also, at least my show, is sponsored by Concealment Solutions. I want to give them a mention on this video. If you're looking for a real good concealed carry holster, check out Concealment Solutions. And links to all this stuff will be found underneath this video, where all the links usually are posted. Thanks for watching.
Modern Handgunners out.